Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to BookTrek 2021. This is a 5-month mission that myself and an intrepid crew of other booktubers are embarked on to read Star Trek in the rest of the year, Star Trek novels. Starting in August with the original series, and now in September with The Next Generation, which is the Star Trek incarnation that I like the least. And part of me would kind of like to do something about that, much as I'm fond of my own predispositions. And I thought I would make another BookTrek video today. I apologize, as I did in my other video today, that this is going to have to be it as far as videos go. A massive deadline has cropped up. Not for me, but for a friend of mine who needs to generate a lot of really good prose in a small amount of time. So I can't make 6 videos today, unfortunately. I probably can't make 6 videos tomorrow either. But I have time for the staples, right? And I let BookTrek for September go lax a little, and that was bad. That was bad of me. I made a video about the episode and the novel by David Gerrold, Encounter at Farpoint, the very first Star Trek The Next Generation episode and the very first Next Generation novel. And I got bombarded in my emails by Next Generation shipboard lawyers, quoting rules and regulations and spouting trivia to me until the cows came home, as if any amount of trivia would change my verdict about whether or not the episode, or the novel were any good. I had to sort of acclimate to that. It backpedaled me just a bit, and I realized Next Generation fans are necessarily defensive about their show. That makes perfect sense. There's far better writing in Deep Space Nine. There's far better cast chemistry in Voyager. There's a far better show concept in Star Trek Enterprise, and Star Trek the original series has Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. It has Scotty and Uhura. Enough said. So naturally, Next Generation fans are going to be a little bit on the touchy side when it comes to their show, because I think on some level they realize that the Next Generation sprawls. It sprawls over 7 seasons. No Star Trek had ever done that before. And it has more than its share of weak episodes. And I would argue a couple of weak movies. And I think Next Generation fans are necessarily prickly about that. They bond to the show, and once you bond to a show, you can't change that. You can't go back and unbond from a show. I will always love the Fourth Doctor, for instance. That doesn't stop me from realizing how horrible the special effects are. I had to acclimate to that, and now I find it rather charming, and I am pushing on with reading The Next Generation, even though I have a sudden crushing ninja deadline. And today we are reading a book called Blaze of Glory by Simon Hawke. I could swear, and here I'm inviting the wrath of all of those shipboard lawyers for The Next Generation, I could swear I've read Simon Hawke Next Generation novels that I really liked. I haven't looked it up. I haven't Googled it to see how many of them he's written, but I bet he's written more than this. I didn't remember this book at all. Like I mentioned a couple of times on BookTrek, I'm pretty sure that I've read every Star Trek novel as it came out, just hungrily so. But maybe my hunger was slacking by the time of The Next Generation. Maybe I was thinking, well, I don't really like these characters on the screen, so why would I want to read their adventures? I'll just wait for an original series novel to come out. It could be that I never read this thing. It's probably decades old. And it's the story of the Enterprise D, that is the ship commanded by Jean-Luc Picard, with the bridge crew that you're already familiar with, the Klingon Worf, the empath Deanna Troi, Picard's first officer, his number 1, William Riker, who looks like he walked right out of Jim Kirk's era, Lieutenant Commander Data, who's an android, Wesley Crusher, who's a young man, a boy, who's on the bridge of the flagship of the Federation, Dr. Beverly Crusher, and Geordi LaForge down in engineering, a whole bunch of very recognizable bridge crew. And you might think, if you're looking at this cover, you'll have the same double take that I did when I randomly flashed through these things at night right before reading to pick the one that I want. I'm very sorry for the background. It's damp outside. It's intermittently raining outside, and that is causing my little bean to just be utterly morose. It's just utterly morose. She hates the rain. She doesn't just hate being in the rain. She hates the concept, the philosophical concept of the rain. She just hates it. And it makes her sad. Doesn't it, baby? It makes her sad when it's raining. But I'll just block her as much as I can. But anyway, when I was flashing through these Star Trek The Next Generation covers, I stopped on this one because there's a detail on this cover that will immediately catch your eye, which is that is not the Enterprise D on the ship. That's a Constitution-class starship. That's a starship from 100 years before the Enterprise D. This is the starship design of Jim Kirk of the USS Enterprise. No bloody A, B, C, or D. And it turns out that is true. Picard and his crew are summoned to a starbase around a planet, Catral. It's an interesting planetary design. There's a homeworld of this race that's vaguely Vulcanoid. They look like Vulcans, but they don't act like Vulcans. They don't act like Romulans. We're told that they're a genetic offshoot of the Vulcans and the Romulans, but they don't suppress their emotions. They're not warlike or anything like that. And they have an original planet in their system, but it turns out their system has many M-class worlds, and they have gradually colonized all of them. And this starbase is in orbit around the latest of those planets to be colonized. The starbase is run by a friend of JeanLuc Picard, an old friend of his from the Academy, someone who was a lead cadet when Picard was just a plebe, and who often criticized him, disciplined him, and is now a contented administrator who gives a very affecting little speech at the beginning where he says, "I've had a good career, but not a glittering one. It's not a standout career. I was never going to be offered a ship. And the minute I realized that, I took this starbase offer as soon as it was made to me." It was kind of interesting, and you get the strong sensation from that little description that more is going to come of that in the course of the book, and some more does. But the main focus at the beginning of the book is that starbase commander's current problem, which is a pirate. It turns out in this novel, I had never heard this before in Star Trek lore. It turns out that at some point in the distant past, Starfleet would, when it decommissioned Constitution-class starships, would sell them. Instead of breaking them down for parts or proprietary technology, they would sell them, strip them of warp drive, and sell them to the highest bidder. I had no idea that was true, and I find it hard to believe. I know the U.S. military did that for a long time. Sell and worse. For instance, my darling, the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides, was a horrible training hulk for a long time until, of all things, a poem raised consciousness enough to get that stopped, and it is now an honored museum. But it seems to me, even so, that wouldn't happen. That it wouldn't have happened 100 years ago either. That Starfleet wouldn't do that. Just see this technology out into the universe. But in the context of this book, that's what happened. And this ship, a ship called the Glory, fell into the hands of a pirate who is half Catralian and half human. He's the son of one of the earliest diplomats to Catral and one of the first settlers on the planet, and a Catralian woman, who has taken this ship, named it the Glory, plies the spaceways of the solar system, pirating on vessels, and has souped up this Constitution-class starship with the latest technology, so that although it's half or less than half the size of the Enterprise D, it might have some nasty surprises, even for a ship 100 years later in ordnance. And the pirate's name? The pirate has named himself Blaze, hence the title, Blaze of Glory. Like I said, I do remember liking Simon Hawke novels, and I actually shouldn't. That's not fair, because I did like this novel. I very much did like this novel. The characters of the crew, which I'm starting to see as the weak spot of TNG. I'm starting to see that as the weak spot. If you're writing an original series novel and you don't get Scotty's character right, you have nothing to fall back on. Scotty is his character. If you don't get his character right, it's going to stick out, like it does in Spock Messiah, for instance. If you don't get it right, there's nowhere else for you to go. There's nothing else for you to talk about. If you get a 90,000 word brief, we need this. Paramount tells you we need this, and we need it in 3 weeks, and it's good money, and that just means you have to write 9 solid hours every day to get it done. And let's say you don't know much about the next generation. You just got the brief because you're sleeping with, or is the boyfriend of somebody who has the right position. Then in the next generation, you do have something to fall back on. If you don't know the first thing about Geordi LaForge, you know he has that weird eyepiece. You can look that up. And that's good for 7 paragraphs right there. You don't have to know anything about him. And that is the drawback to the Next Generation crew, is that they're all easily reducible to qualities that don't have anything to do with their personality. And that isn't so much true with the original series. I think what made Picard so much of an enigma to me to begin with, because he isn't reducible to that. Right? Deanna Troi is an empath. She has a superpower. William Riker is brash and brave. He is Captain Kirk. Even has the middle initial. Worf is a Klingon. Data is an android. Wesley Crusher is a boy. You can easily do that for the Next Generation crew, except for Picard. What is Picard? That was a huge stumbling block for me when I was originally watching this show and thinking, well, okay, some of the concepts here are interesting, but who is this bloodless bureaucrat running the flagship of the Federation? He doesn't seem to like his job. He doesn't seem to like any of his crew. They don't seem to like him. He certainly doesn't inspire loyalty. He's a plodding, managerial, wintry thinker. And again, like I said yesterday, part of that was my fault, thinking this was a continuation of the original series. There are all kinds of captains. You only have to read about the naval commands in the World War II Pacific theater to know. There are all kinds of vessel commanders. They don't all have to be cut from the same cloth to be interesting or to be effective. It took me a long time to come to that with JeanLuc Picard. In fact, I might, oddly enough, not have fully come to that until he no longer commanded a starship, until Star Trek Picard. That might have been the thing that did it for me. In this book, he's brimming with personality. I've mentioned it a few times now. I won't harp on this for the rest of the month, but I rewatched the Star Trek The Next Generation movie, Insurrection, and there you have a JeanLuc Picard. He is wintry. He is bloodless. He is a bureaucrat, but he's also steely and intellectual, a completely different character sketch from Jim Kirk. And in the movie, it absolutely works. It absolutely works. When he's being led, we think to his death by radiation poisoning by one of the alien thugs in that movie. He doesn't try a last-minute leg kick, a scissor switch, or a jaw punch like Jim Kirk was. Instead, he recites the thug's litany of errors against common humanity and says, "You disgust me." And it's every bit as effective as a Kirk elbow jab or body roll. It's just a completely different person. It works perfectly. I'm not mean to harp on Star Trek Insurrection. Maybe if we have a Zoom chat, we'll talk about the Next Generation movies. But that Picard, forceful but not fraternal, is very much the Picard of this novel, and it works really well. And all the other characters, there aren't many. The whole cast is not really featured in this book. It's really Picard and Riker. But both of them are done perfectly, and so are all the other cast members that have bits and pieces. Some of them only have lines of dialogue. Data has a little bit more. I don't know what he's doing on the cover of the book. He's not a major character. Riker should be on the cover of the book. I think he's probably on the cover of the book because he's one of the most popular characters. For instance, early on in this book, I read a little detail about Data that I had never thought of before. I don't know if Simon Hawke made it up, but I love it, which is that little Brent Spiner tick of the head when Data is asked to info dump is a gesture that he imitates from humans. That head cock is something he imitates from humans who are cogitating. He doesn't need to do it. I thought that was rather neat. And there are moments like that scattered throughout here. And much as I hate to say it, I don't mean to ever give authors encouragement for cringeworthy things like Blaze of Glory. I don't mean to ever encourage that, but much as I hate to say it, Blaze, the character, the pirate, is really well done in this book. I wanted more of the character than I got in this book. And there are broader things as well. There's a mystery down on the planet, and you're halfway through the book wondering, okay, does everybody except the Enterprise crew know about this mystery? Something about it? Even Picard's old friend? And there's also an involvement with the Romulans. It turns out that Catral and its system are very close to the Romulan neutral zone, which might make sense because the Catralian people have a genetic common stock with Romulans and Vulcans. All rather well brought together. I really, really enjoyed it. All the way to the end. There's a space battle at the end, and also the space battle is really well done, but there's also a kind of face-to-face conversational on the brink negotiation that's, if anything, more thrilling than the space battle. So this is an author I mentioned many times doing BookTrek in August that I was staying away from favorite authors of mine. I don't know a lot of the repeat authors for the next generation. Some of my favorite authors for Star Trek do write novels for the next generation. I'm going to avoid those. But maybe Simon Hawke is going to become one of my favorite authors for the next generation. Later on in the month, I will find another book of his and read it, just to see. Maybe even, as in the case with Blaze of Glory, it will be a book that I think I'm reading for the first time. The one real repeat writer of the next generation that I know of who isn't a favorite of mine, Diane Carey is my favorite Star Trek writer, and she's written quite a bit of Next Generation, including what I think is one of the best Star Trek novels of them all. I'm not going to be reading any of those. But one author who does crop up often in the Next Generation is somebody I'm going to have to come to terms with in the course of this September, and that's Peter David, who's also a prolific comic book writer. I know him more from his comic books than I do from his endless amounts of science fiction. Endless amounts. And I'm going to have to... I mean, he's a fan favorite with Next Generation novels. I'm going to have to come to terms with him and maybe end up liking him. We shall see. He did an entire Star Trek series that was adjacent to Star Trek. We're not doing it for BookTrek. That I largely hated. I largely didn't like it at all, even though it features the return of a lot of stable characters and the introduction of a lot of interesting new characters. I largely didn't like it at all. But I'm going to have to come to terms with Peter David. But maybe Simon Hawke will be someone that I will really like. Don't I remember him writing a Star Trek The Next Generation novel called The Romulan Prize? I could swear I remember that. There's a great episode of The Next Generation where a hunt is on board for a Romulan infiltrator, for a spy on board the Enterprise, and suspicion falls on a crewman, Simon Tarses, who turns out is part Romulan. And I think he was the main side character in The Romulan Prize, if I remember any of this correctly. I'll have to find out. Please, Next Generation shipboard lawyers, please don't descend on me with paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of star dates and production notes. I will figure this out on my own, but I'm not going to read another Simon Hawke novel right away. I'm going to let random chance pick again tonight. But I really enjoyed this one. I really enjoyed Blaze of Glory. So today's Star Trek The Next Generation novel is a recommend. All the characters in place. It was a really well-constructed plot. You know, when the Enterprise is summoned to the space station by Picard's old friend, and the old friend is starting to talk about the problems he's having with this pirate called Blaze, JeanLuc Picard he's not haughty or dismissive, but he is a little incredulous. You called us here for this? You have cutters of your own. We're the flagship of the Federation. It could lay waste to this planet in 5 seconds. Why are you calling me here for a pirate? And I had that same reaction. Is this a big enough story for the Enterprise D? But it gets bigger. There are multiple layers that make it bigger, and that all works really well. So, very pleased with my Star Trek reading today. I'm very sorry about my depressed little being. It is raining outside, and that's all it takes. And I'm also sorry about the lack of videos today. There's only going to be 2 videos today, unfortunately. Outside exigencies, they leave no room. They leave no room for maneuver. They might if I were willing to stint on writing of my own, but I'm not. So if it's writing that has to be done for money or paid goons in sunglasses show up on your door, or writing of my own that it could be tossed off, the starboard side, or BookTube, then I'm afraid the slack has to come out of BookTube, but I will return. Thank you, BookTube.